Joe, a rivalry renewed. Texas versus Texas A&M this week. Probably and humbly a game that most people, Joe, have been circling since the preseason. Texas and A&M, a big-time rival who have been separated for well over a decade, now are back and will play in the SEC this week, I should say. Joe, your thoughts on Texas versus Texas A&M?
So the first thing that we have to bring up, Blake, and I actually don't think that this is like so cataclysmic for obvious reason, is Quinn Ewers' injury situation. He's getting an MRI. It doesn't seem like we're going to get a really nailed down answer from Steve Sarkisian. We're going to get the typical run around and like, oh, well, we're getting updates.
We'll see how he's doing. Yeah.
It's not cataclysmic because we know that Arch Manning is good enough to step in and play, and there's not going to be much of a separation in performance, and he's good enough to be a high-quality starter for this Texas team. The biggest talking point outside of that I think needs to be focused on, forget the stats, forget the X's and O's for a second, and I think you're going to agree with me on this. One of the biggest trends this year in the SEC, Blake, has been how do teams play on the road at night against tough opponents that have nothing to lose.
Texas might be a backup quarterback.
Right. Texas A&M needs this win to stay in playoff relevance, to win the SEC championship, to get into the playoff field. Based on what we saw just this last weekend alone, with the Oklahoma win, with the Auburn win, even with the Florida win, that game was not a night, but still, I think that this road environment, we have seen Texas A&M use that to their advantage. It is the biggest thing that I'm paying attention to is how does Texas start the football game? How do they do on their first offensive drive? Do they go down and score? Do they have big plays? Do they get stymied early? And on defense, are they playing well against the run? Are they playing good in their run fits? Are they stopping Marcel Reed? The first quarter, I think, to me, Blake, is going to be super telling on how this game is going to unfold.
So the biggest thing in this is that, look, I don't think that Texas has seen I'm trying to think. Outside of Georgia, I can't think of a more physical team that they faced this year on both lines of scrimmage than A&M. The problem that I have with that is that everybody's going to look at A&M and reference the Auburn game, okay? And I get that. This is going to be much deeper and have much more meaning because of the outright instance of what this rivalry means. I don't think either team can blow either team out. I don't. I think this is going to be hard fought and a well orchestrated game. But, Joe, we're talking about this on a Monday, so I want to make this well known. You know that on this show, I have not been a massive fan of Quinn Ewers, okay? And I think that he's too turnover prone. He literally had a horrible interception last week versus Kentucky. Prime Quinn Ewers, a pick six. The problem that I have right now, though, is to go into the environment of where they're at. Arch has not been in this situation, okay? And I think that it's a bigger deal, even though I think that Arch is a really good quarterback. I really do. I think he's going to be exceptional. I think Texas has been a really good program this year. But asking a first-time starter, because he's been a starter this year, but asking a guy to go in that hostile environment in this rivalry to overcome what he's got to overcome, I do think is asking a lot. And the problem is you can't run the football. And, Joe, when I look at Texas, like I look at them, their run offense. They're 58th in the country in running offense or rushing offense. Joe, the only ranked team that they've played outside of Georgia has been who? Vandy. And they ran for 104 yards against Vanderbilt. I know Auburn did what they did last week. Auburn has been better at running the football than you. Don't take me for it. Go look at it statistically of what they've been able to do. Joe, the bottom line is simple for me in this. I think A&M's going to win. I'm going to take A&M to win here, and here's why. I think that they, in that place at night, in this situation, they're going to bounce back and overcome. Now, I don't have a lot of faith in it. I don't. I just think that front seven gets after whatever quarterback's going to be there. I don't think A&M's going to, or Texas is going to be able to run the ball on them like they want to. Now, can they get some things in the secondary on A&M because Peyton Thorne did last week? Sure. Okay, Lenore Sellers did. Sure, they can. There's going to be moments and times where they need to throw to run the football, and I don't know if they're going to be able to do it. Here's the second thing. I like A&M because they're the more physical team. I say this all the time too. I don't like a team going on the road against another team who's a dog in a corner. And A&M is a dog in a corner. They got nothing to lose here. Nothing. So what if they get beat by Texas? So what? Year one, you're fighting for a playoff spot. That's our SEC championship spot. That's where they'll be. But, Joe, it's going to be really crazy if Texas in year one in the SEC comes in here and gets some more SEC championship games than A&M. This is deeper than anybody. That's what she said. But this is deeper than what anybody will admit. I'm looking at the physicality here. Now, again, Quinn Ewers being banged up would scare me a little. He's always been injury prone. But if you have to go to Arch, Joe, I got to admit, in that place at night, man, I just don't know if they can go in there and overcome it.
I think that, first of all, I agree with you. I think that Texas A&M has a lot of – they don't have momentum at the current moment because they're coming off of a loss. That's one thing that's going against them. But there's a lot of reasons to support why they could win this football game. There's arguments for Texas. We're not sitting here, and I don't think this is one of those games where it is a cut and dry, Texas A&M wins. There's no ifs, ands, or buts about it. It's just going to go this way. It's not one of those games here. But I think with the margins being so close as you're discussing, it's important to lean the home team in a hostile environment, and that home team is facing off against a quarterback who's banged up or a spot starter who is a sophomore and who's only played a couple of games. Statistically, though, and I'm slowly kind of becoming a bit of a junkie for some of these advanced statistics, and there's a lot of things that Texas gets overshadowed for how weak that they've performed in. They're 71st in offensive EPA per rush, so they have decent rushing statistics over the last few games, but they're not doing it efficiently. They're not doing it statistically. They're this is the craziest part. 105th in offensive havoc rate, meaning that they allow tackles for loss in sacks. They're the 105th offensive line in the country in that category. So I have a lot of fear here. If they can't get things moving on the ground, going up against a front seven for Texas A&M that has been stout, that just got pushed around by Auburn, and they're going to be pissed off and wanting to recalibrate. And they've had good games against the run this year. The game against Auburn was an aberration. It is not the trend that the Aggies have put on tape this season.
And if we're being honest, Auburn has done that against everybody that they've played. They just kept turning the ball over. That was nothing new for Auburn outside of not turning the ball over.
Yeah.
I mean, raising their top 30 in total offense.
Right. I keep coming back here to Texas A&M, everything that you just talked about there. That front seven has been productive. They've been disruptive. They've gotten penetration. They're 17th in defensive havoc rate on the flip side of this. So that is a very, very concerning matchup. Again, and I got to keep coming back to when there is that much separation between a team's offensive line performance and a team's defensive line performance. If the defensive line is the home team at night, that is going to show up early on in this game.
Well, and not only that, I just envision there being situations where they can't run the ball early and it goes full Georgia mode and you're having to get 5-7 step drops and your O-line's not able, and those guys at the D-line's able to pin their ears back and you're not going to have enough time. Legitimately. And now I'm not saying A&M is Georgia, but I still think that they have a defensive line that can perform. Now, Joe, here's the problem that I have with A&M at the current moment.
Yeah.
Regardless of what two quarterbacks, okay, are going to play for Texas, A&M secondary is weak. It is very weak. They're 81st in the country in passing yards allowed, and when they're not getting home, they have issues. Look, man, A&M's had a lot of big wins this year. Okay, they've done better than most expected. But I look at them and say, look, man, if that front four isn't getting home, they got a problem. I saw it in the first half versus LSU. I saw it against a quarterback who's not prone to throwing the football in Lenore Sellers. And I saw arguably the butt end of every quarterback joke this year. And Peyton Thorne, I mean, Joe, they secondary wise, brother, they're not that great right now. And their lack of communication in the back end, I think, has hurt them. I got to be real with you. I think Elko's doing too much defensively. They're trying to do way too much, and I think that has led to some of these busted coverages the last couple of weeks. I know it's your system. I know it's your defense. But sometimes being simple can work in a situation like this when you might have the more physical football team. Joe, they're trying to send corner blitzes. They're sending guys out of the slot, and one guy's running man-to-man. The other guy's running cover two. And I'm like, what are we doing here? Right? Like, I mean, this is insanity. So if there is an avenue, Texas can obliterate them. Joe, I think it's going to be in that passing game. One other thing, too. Last week offensively, this got missed in the loss, okay, that A&M had. They are a different beast with Marcel Reed at quarterback, brother. They're a different animal. The way that they run the ball, the way that they're downhill. By the way, their two best backs were out, and they still are running it right at you. Just to throw this out there. Coming into this game, or going in that game last week, Texas A&M versus Auburn. Auburn was 10th in the country in run defense. 10th. And they ran it right at them and busted them up. Now Auburn is 20th. So I look at this whole situation, Joe, and just say this. Man, you better convert on third downs if you're Texas. Because if you let A&M lean on you all night, it's going to be a bad matchup.
Just a quick thought. It seems like there might be a possibility that Reuben Owens is available for this game because he's been popping up as trending towards being available. I'm just throwing that out there. Even, Joe, you are correct. Elko addressed this, and he's on the injury report. I got to bring that up, though. That kid's not coming into this game in this situation and making plays. He's not going to. Yeah, but it doesn't hurt he'd probably come in as a third option just because, I mean, they're also, both teams are thin at running back right now with the injuries that they're dealing with. But to get back to what you're saying with why, the argument for Texas and why they could win this football game, they battle through the adversity of playing on the road. If Quinn Ewers is as healthy as he needs to be to play one of his best games, that's what they need from him. I also agree with you. I don't feel good about that secondary that we watched completely get bossed up. We talked about this.
Three straight weeks now.
Right.
3 straight weeks.
And it was in one of the most demoralizing ways possible where Keandre Lambert-Smith is winning in these contested spots and Cam Coleman's completely dusting guys out of their cleats and he's blowing past them for wide open routes. So we could see Isaiah Bond and Golden and all these guys have huge games because they're just too quick and too explosive for that secondary to keep up with. And the other part about this, we were just lauding the Texas A&M front and how they could perform. We still have to give praise here to what has been the most productive, arguably the most productive defense in the country and defensive line. They have been extremely disruptive with a true freshman, Colin Simmons, who has been leading the way for them. They have a deep group. It didn't show up so much against Georgia, but this is a game where they have to show up going up against Texas A&M offensive line that has been a hair inconsistent, understandably dealing with some of the injuries that they've been facing.
I got to throw this out there. Outside of Georgia, I don't know if Texas has faced a team that can line up and run the ball at them either. For example, I don't know of a team that Colin Simmons, when he's been a full-time guy, I could see Colin Simmons in a 4-quarter situation starting to fade as a freshman. Kid's going to be an All-American. Stop. Joe, all right now. Okay.
Yeah, I mean, if we're being honest, Michigan's offensive line, which we're going to bring up later, statistically is fat average. They're in the middle. Mississippi State's offensive line's mediocre. Oklahoma's is terrible. They didn't really get the same level of sack production that we would have thought that they would have gotten against a banged up Georgia offensive line. Vanderbilt's offensive line is average. The best unit they probably faced was Florida, and they were productive. They were good against Florida, but
that's with a third string quarterback.
Right. So yeah,
And a
I think
walk-on from Yale. I'm not taking that.
the context that you're bringing up here is accurate. I'm not, and like you're saying, I don't want to diminish the performances by Texas this year, but you're right. There does need to be an asterisk here because, I mean, Texas fans, I would love to know what is the hardest offensive line that you have faced to this point where Texas A&M has had
a banged up Georgia.
Yeah, that's probably
it's a banged up Georgia.
Well, let me ask you the opposite, though, and I'm not saying this like in a gotcha way, but what's the hardest offensive line that Texas A&M has played? Yeah, that's a good point, and they were pretty productive against. That's where, look, plain and simple. That's where this game is won. It's going to be won on the line of scrimmage. Whose offensive line plays the best, and whose defensive line plays the best. That can be applied to a lot of games in any given week, but I think that this game especially, it's going to be crucial.
I mean, Joe, they had their way with 2 first-round tackles. So if we're going to call a spade, man, all right. Y'all, all right. I'm just telling you. A&M secondary, don't let me down here. All right.
BetOnline remains your top spot for all of your live betting action and contests. NFL, college football, UFC, NHL are all in full swing. BetOnline is your number one source for wagering news, odds, trends, and predictions with both desktop and mobile access at any time. Head to BetOnline today and use promo code BELIEVE, that's BLEAV, for 50% off your first deposit. That is a 50% welcome bonus. BetOnline, where the game starts.